Hello everyone, welcome to Edison School of Law. Today I'll be looking at the concept executor is untaught in both Nigeria and the United Kingdom and as it applies in other Commonwealth countries. And this is patterned into a Q&A session for better understanding. By way of introduction, the concept of executor is untaught in both the UK and Nigeria, succession law and the administration of a deceased person's estate should ordinarily be handled by only a duly appointed executor where there is a valid will, or the person dying testate, or an administrator where there is no valid will, or where the person dies intestate, that is without a will. However, there are situations where a person without any lawful authority is allowed to interfere with the estate of a deceased person. Such a person is called an executor is untaught, meaning executor of his own wrong. Question 1. Who is an executor is untaught? An executor is untaught is someone who intermeddles with the property of a deceased person without any legal authority and in a manner that amounts to assuming the role of a personal administrator. The law treats such a person as though he were a rightful executor, but only to the extent of making him liable for his wrongful acts, not confer on him any benefits. This means that the law treats the person as if they were a real executor, but only so they can be held responsible for what they have done wrong, not so they can gain any benefits from the estate. Question 2. What does it mean to intermeddle? To intermeddle means to interfere with or handle something you have no legal right or authority to manage. In succession law, both in the UK and Nigeria, intermeddling refers specifically to dealing with a deceased person estate without being legally appointed as an executor or administrator. It includes any act that makes it appear as though you are managing, controlling, or administering the estate, even though you have no lawful authority to do so. Some acts that amount to intermeddling, giving rise to executor is untaught, include a person may become an executor is untaught by actions, that is, taking the deceased property and selling it, paying or collecting debts of the deceased, using the deceased assets for personal benefit, running the deceased business without authorization, distributing parts of the estate without the grant of probate or letters of administration. However, mere protective actions do not make someone an executor is untaught. Examples include locking the deceased house to secure their property, arranging the deceased funeral, paying necessary expenses before being appointed. Question 3. What are the legal consequences of acting as an executor is untaught? Once a person becomes an executor is untaught, he is liable to the rightful beneficiaries of the dead person's estate or creditors for losses caused by his actions, misapplication of estate assets. He is treated as if he were a lawful executor, but only for the purpose of accountability. He cannot claim any benefit from the estate because he had no authority in the first place. Question 4. What is the doctrine of relation back? This is a unique and important rule that applies where someone first acts as an executor is untaught and is later legally appointed executor or an administrator. Under the doctrine of relation back, when a lawful grant of probate or letters of administration is eventually issued, the law treats the authority of the executor or the administrator as having begun from the moment of the death of the deceased, not from the date of the grant. Thus, legal authority relates back to the date of death. Question 5. What if an executor is on tort is appointed as the executor? Yeah. If an executor is on tort is eventually appointed as executor, named as executor in the will, granted probate, granted letters of administration, then their earlier acts, even though performed without authority, become retrospectively lawful if they were acts that a lawful representative could validly have performed. That is, if you acted like an executor is on tort without that legal authority initially, and you later become the lawful executor, the law forgives your earlier acts, provided they were the kind of acts a real executor could do. However, your wrongful acts or fraudulent dealings are not protected. Can you give real examples in the UK and in Nigeria? Sure. A UK example that comes to mind is Derek takes money from his deceased father's bank account and uses it to settle some funeral expenses before any probate is granted. Technically, Derek has intermeddled. But later his father's will is discovered, naming Derek as executor. Upon probate being granted, the law says Derek's earlier payment of debts becomes lawful. This is because the authority of the executor relates back to the date of death. A Nigerian example, Ada sells her late mother's car to pay school fees for her siblings without obtaining letters of administration. 6 months later, the family appoints her to apply for administration, and the probate court issues her letters. Her earlier sale of the car becomes valid provided she acted in good faith and the sale was for estate purposes. Because her authority now relates back to the mother's date of death. Could you give some locus classical cases to buttress your point? Certainly. Example, James and Williams, 1827, 5B and C, 549 UK. This is a leading English case confirming that someone who intermeddles with the estates is liable as executor is on tort. The second one, re-estate of Intermeddling, Nigerian contest. Nigerian courts have consistently applied this doctrine that intermeddlers are accountable as executors is on tort. A third case, Lowy and Fox, 1838. A classic authority for the doctrine of relation back, confirming that a later grant validates earlier acts of a person who assumed the executor's role. 4. Banfield and Deben, 1849. This case established that wrongful or fraudulent acts are not cured by later appointment. Can you summarize everything in one line? Sure. An executor is on tort is someone who wrongfully takes on the role of administering a deceased person's estate without lawful authority. The law holds such a person responsible if they were a rightful executor, but only to impose liability, not rights. However, if that person is later legally appointed as executor or administrator, the doctrine of relation back makes their earlier lawful acts valid retrospectively, though fraudulent or wrongful dealings remain unlawful and punishable. If you found this video helpful, please comment so we can share your experiences in the next. Till we meet again, this is Edesiri Enowo of Edesiri School of Law. Thank you.